All right, everybody, probably go ahead and get started now. We're still there. But just introduce myself. Hi, I'm David Benjamin. I work as a software engineer / project manager these days, and I'm an absentee team mentor for 1731 outside of Preston Valley Robotics. But today I want to be presenting on implementing Agile project management for your team, which is going to be a little bit of a misnomer because I have 30 minutes. So this is really going to be more of a fire hose of information regarding Agile and one of the frameworks for implementing Agile, Scrum. I'm not really going to go into too many details on how exactly to tailor it to your team, but I am going to give you the foundation and basic tools to start. So it's kind of gauging the room a little bit. Do we have any folks that are familiar with Agile or you use Agile day to day? All right. Do we have any Agile or Scrum purists in the room? All right, good. We're working with a good crowd then. So if you want to move over to the next slide, please. So yeah, moving through our agenda, we're going to go through the Agile mindset. This is going to be the methodology behind being Agile. We're going to start going through Scrum, which is one of many frameworks for implementing Agile for your team. And then I'm going to give you a couple of resources that I have really enjoyed that have been helpful in shaping my career towards the end. And we're going to go into some other items that which may be a better approach for your team. So Agile, right? A little bit of history lesson. Back in the 90s, some folks got together and talked about how can we together produce products better, how can we be faster, higher quality, and how can we have more communication with our stakeholders, right? So they got together and they wrote this manifesto, and I'm not going to try to read off the screen too much, but for this one, I am going to read through here, right? We're uncovering better ways of developing software by doing it and helping others do it. Through this work, we have come to value individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, responding to change over following the plan. That is, while there's values in the items on the right, we value the items on the left. Okay, so as I'm sure you're all familiar, we might have to substitute some words here for first, right? Individuals and interactions, right? These are our interactions on our teams, between our students, between our mentors, how we work together to produce products. Because at the end of the day, we're creating a product for ourselves, right? That said, if you're looking at gracious professionalism, there's a larger ecosystem that we're working towards, and that's the competition, how we work together as teams, right? Again, that doesn't mean that our processes and our tools, how we work together to deliver a product or a robot in whatever period of time it is, whether it's 6 weeks or more or less than that, right? There's value, and we'll see that pop up again later, right? Working software, or in this case, a working robot over comprehensive documentation. And again, you'll see comprehensive documentation pop up later, because comprehensive documentation helps be agile later on because it helps you iterate and adapt later on, right? Customer collaboration, or in this case, collaboration within our teams or our sub-teams between electrical and software or hardware or chassis. Over contract negotiation, which may be a little bit less of a concern for this group, thankfully, with gracious professionalism. And then responding to change or following the plan. We're in a very chaotic environment, right, in our build season. So being able to respond quickly to that change and not having a scope document or a plan that you set forth in your 0 year that you follow to a team, being able to adapt to changing environments, changing situations, or changing rules. All right, next slide, please. So now kind of getting into one of the pieces where we'll have to log through a little bit, kind of supporting those principle or those thoughts. Manifesto, there are a set of 12 principles. It's up between 2 pages. We'll just work through these real fast. Our highest priority is to satisfy the customer through early and continuous delivery of valuable software. That's a sentence that I could put an entire presentation on. It would kind of go through there quickly, right? We are the company, our teams are the customers. So being able to satisfy our need to deliver a robot, a functioning robot, and to learn the engineering and skills and business skills and soft skills behind that. in a timely manner, being able to take time in our schedule, step back early, inspect our product, inspect our processes, and adapt. And welcoming changing requirements in development, being able to change the competitive advantage. So being able to adapt rapidly within our ecosystem, right? At the end of the day, this is a form of rapid prototyping, whether or not you like the term prototyping, but being able to take that step back and, right? To deliver working software frequently from a couple of weeks to a couple of months with preference to the shorter time scale. Of course, we're on a much shorter time scale for our products as right, for FRC at least, we have a 6-week build period. So, you know, this might be a 1-week sprint, it might be a day-by-day basis that you're stepping back to iterate on those processes. So business people and developers must work together daily throughout the product, our projects. Of course, in our ecosystem, our developers who are the people who are building the product, right? Are the business people oftentimes, right? But being able to have that interaction together daily, or on whatever cadence you're meeting together with the team. Build projects around motivated individuals, give them the environment, support they need, and trust them to get the job done. That one is especially pertinent to us as mentors, for being able to step back, to release those reins, to find those students that you can pour into to really give them the ability to blossom and to drive and steer the project to get their students rather than being as a mentor-led team where possible, right? And having that trust. Right, so then the most effective and efficient method of conveying information to and within a development team is face-to-face conversation. Of course, that's another easy one within FIRST robotics, right? Because we work co-located in space oftentimes as teams. Next. So, working software or a working robot is the primary measure of progress in some senses. In this case, we kind of step beyond software, and there are other keys to success if you're in session this morning with Shelley. But being able to have these tangible measures towards what you are working towards, right? And then agile processes promote sustainable development. The sponsors, developers, and users should be able to maintain a constant pace indefinitely. I think for our teams, we have a set schedule, so being able to establish goals as a team together and being able to progress towards those. In a sustainable format, right? So being able to stay away from many of those, 2 a.m. late nights, but being by planning sufficiently for your team. Continuous attention to technical excellence and good design enhances agility, right? That goes back to one of those, we value the left over the right. That said, the right still has value statements, right? There is a place for documentation and having that measure once or measure twice, cut once approach, right? Simplicity, the art of maximizing the amount of work not done is essential. So being able to, again, take a look at what your design or what your approach is, being able to know where to step back and where to focus and where to prioritize your work. And that's a term we'll talk about soon, right? Best architectures, requirements, and designs emerge from self-organizing teams. And it's again, kind of going back to being able to step back as mentors and help these students self-manage and self-organize so that they're able to drive and take ownership over their product. And finally, at regular intervals, the team reflects on how to become more effective and tunes and adjusts behavior reporting. So making sure that there is a natural pause in your process where you take a step back and you look at the product that you built and the processes that you use to build it, and being able to identify what went well so you can continue doing those things, what didn't go well so that you can come up with courses of action to address those. Now that was the fire hose of information, and that was what can be a 3-day class. But those are some principles to kind of think about as you're working with your teams on how to implement your processes. That's the mindset. If you go to the next page, please. Scrum is a framework, right? So Scrum is a framework for how to implement the Agile methodology. It is not a complete set of rules. Rather, it allows each team to tailor the elements to their unique culture and environment. So it's going to take those principles and what was written in the manifesto and give you the puzzle pieces that you need to be able to start implementing some of those mindsets into your team, right? It's the mindset in the framework that you can start putting in your own parts and tailoring the process for your teams. So we're going to quickly go over Scrum theory again. This is really going to be slogging through definitions today. Right, we're going to go through the Scrum
Hi,
team.
excuse me. Can you please pardon this interruption? I'm viewing this meeting remotely, and there's 4 different meetings, but yours is the only one where the Zoom is functional. If someone wouldn't mind going out into the hall and troubleshooting the Zoom meetings for the other 3 breakout sessions, they're not. I'm sorry for the interruption. I will unmute.
Thank you for the feedback.
Great, yeah, so kind of going through our stuff, right? I was being clever last night, but what is Scrum, right? Who is involved in Scrum and executing this within a team environment? How do we perform Scrum? What are the events and processes that we use within our time boxes? And then why are we doing Scrum? What is the purpose and what are we getting out of Scrum at the end of the day, right? So if we can go to the next slide, please. There we go. So yeah, Scrum theory is built on empiricism. If anybody is gonna do, this is a workshop, so this is gonna be my one collaboration. Does anybody know what empiricism is? All right, empiricism theory. It is evidence-based, right? So it's taking a process or a thought, executing upon it, and then looking at it through a scientific lens, determining how that worked and whether it was true or not, and being able to adjust that. That's really what Scrum is based on. Beyond that, there are 3 pillars that support that. We have transparency. So being able to communicate effectively and be clear and honest about what processes you're doing and how you're performing your work. Inspection, right? So that's looking at your processes and your product and figuring out what's going well and what's not going well. And then adaptation, taking those levels of transparency and inspection and then applying what your outputs are. With that, you'll see some terms that are familiar with gracious professionalism and first values, right? So commitment, focus, openness, respect, and courage. And those are a lot of the tenets and the values that are really going to drive a lot of the framework, right? One of those things where it can be a soulless structure. And it is a corporate environments, but there is a purpose and there's value if you're pursuing it for the right reasons in the right. So going into a little bit more of the nitty-gritty, Scrum teams typically going to be composed of these 3 individuals or 3 groups. You have developers, which is a bit of a misnomer because this is typically a software-based methodology. Developers are really going to be anybody who is working on delivering a project. Those could be your software developers, your electrical engineers, your hardware mechanical engineers of your team. But they're the folks that are working on creating a valuable increment, which we'll get to in a second, during each sprint, which we'll also get to in a second, and taking accountability for what work is completed and how it is completed, right? The thing that's unique about developers in this sense is they are the people who are responsible for looking at what needs to be created, identifying how they should be created, how it should be created, identifying the value behind it, and then making sure that it is being accomplished in their given time period and being able to adapt to the changing environment. We also have a product owner. Product owners are going to maximize the value of the work the Scrum team creates by communicating the product goal, which we'll get to in a second. The work that has to take place to reach that product goal and priorities, right? So your product goal as a robotics team is to deliver a robot. That said, there are other features within that. You need a drivetrain, you need software, you need game elements, right? So being able to break it down into those and decompose all of those features into workable units of work, and then being able to prioritize those based off of dependencies, value, effort, whatever your strategy is. Finally, we have a Scrum Master. This is where we have any Scrum purists and cover your ears. These are the folks that coach the Scrum team to implement Scrum and ensure that the Scrum events occur and are properly time boxed. These really can be merged into some other roles. I've seen PMs fill that Scrum Master role. I've seen your team captains fill that Scrum Master role. But those are really going to be the folks that are helping the team stay on track with implementing the parts of the framework that are kind of set in stone and helping the team complete those three pillars of transparency and adaption. Next slide. So kind of getting into Scrum events now, and these are some terms that you'll start to recognize from the earlier slide. The first and arguably most important event is the sprint, right? The sprint is a fixed length of time which the Scrum team is going to complete the Scrum events that we're seeing and deliver the artifacts on the next slide, which you can go back, sorry about that. So in a traditional sense, usually, right, that is a 2-week to a month-long period of time. For robotics teams, that might be a day or 3 days or a week at a time. But during that time, you're going to identify a set of features that provide value, that are usable and actionable within that time span. And you're going to create a plan to execute on that. And that's really going to happen during the sprint plan. Right? You're going to identify the work that needs to be completed, how it's going to be completed, and then most importantly, why it's valuable to your team, right? Is it valuable because you need a chassis to begin adding the rest of the components onto, right? So sprint planning is really where the team gets together and identifies that work. Finally, or next, we have daily Scrum. That's a communication checkpoint from a day-to-day basis. If we're working on longer teams, I know my team personally, we typically meet twice a day in a daily Scrum, usually once in the morning and then once around like mid-afternoon. But that's where we really inspect progress towards our sprint goal. And it allows the Scrum team to adapt as necessary. There are some common questions that people will ask during those, such as what have you worked on? What are you working on now? And are there any blockers? And that's so that everybody is aware of what's kind of in the pipeline, who's working on what, and it gives the team the ability to address issues as they arise, rather than kind of having things sit on its own. So next up, we have the sprint review. That's going to be a dedicated period of time to look at the outcome of the sprint in the context of the product goal. How is this helping us achieve our overall goal? It's not really in this scenario, but in other scenarios, it's not just demo, right? It's a time where you're actually going to inspect what work you've created and adapt to it, right? It's part of the iterative process. You're going to look at what you built and say, well, we could have done this better, or now that we know this, here's what we should be doing next, right? And being able to adapt. And then finally, sprint retrospective. So while sprint review looks at the product that you're creating, sprint retrospective, retro looks at how you're creating, right? What is going well with your process so that we can keep doing this? What's not going well so we can take a step back and figure out how to adjust so that we're being more efficient with our time, where we're producing more quality product, right? Next slide. So finally, all of this is to create these Scrum artifacts, right? So we have the product backlog, and that's going to be an order to prioritize list of what we need to complete for the projects. Oh, go back one slide. But yeah, this is what you need to reach your most viable product, right? And then you can iterate upon that, but it's right, kind of going back. What are your user stories, or what are the features that you need to complete so that you can have a functioning product? So typically that is owned by the product owner. It's something that they'll go through and they'll prioritize, and they'll say, we need this due to this criteria, we need this next, and this next, and this next. That gets filtered down into the sprint backlog. The sprint backlog is really owned by your developers or your Scrum team. It's something where they'll look at the priorities that the product owner created. They'll identify, the top 3 or 4 or 5 based off of their capacity. And they will bring those into the sprint. And this creates the sprint goal, right? So that is the valuable product expected at the end of the sprint. That's something that is usable and provides value to the team in the sprint. Those finally create the income, right? So it's the output, the physical output of the sprint. It's a usable functionality and additive to the product. It's been delivered and it's verified against the definition of done, which is an important concept because you need to know when you have reached a point in your functionality or your project where you can efficient or say this is sufficient, or this has met our needs as a user base or as a customer or as a team, that you can be able to set that down and move on to the next topic, and make this status. And then you can go to the next slide, please. So that was a little bit of a fire hose in, I think, 20 minutes or 25 minutes or so, Scrum and Agile. As you can tell, there's a lot that goes behind the scenes beyond what's been put on the slides here. There's such as capacity planning, like what can you as a team actually accomplish within a given amount of time? How do we estimate work, right? So being able to look at work and say, you know, based off of our prior experiences, we know that, you know, setting up Swerve Drive is going to take 4 days instead of 15 minutes to complete, right? And being able to therefore adjust what your sprint looks like based off of that information. That said, a lot of that kind of goes into the nitty gritty of this, so I wanted to make sure that I'll have some resources here. I need to check and make sure that these slides are actually publicly available, but there are links here to the Agile Manifesto and the Scrum Guide, which is the comprehensive body of knowledge for how to apply Scrum. And then a Kanban guide, which is a slightly different approach to management of projects other than the Scrum, and it's based off of, I believe, board assembly lines, and it tends to have more of a continuous flow. So those are some helpful tools. That said, another resource I'd like to offer is myself. If you ever want to reach out via phone or email or LinkedIn or anything, I'm happy to answer any questions or help maybe work on how to actually implement this for your team. That said, I'm available for questions now.
So my team learned about Agile from somebody else, sorry, but we kind of tried to implement it. So what it looked like for us this season was on the macro scale, it was, you know, a sprint was between competitions, you know, like we went to a scrimmage, like getting the robot ready for a scrimmage was one sprint, getting the robot ready for competition 1 was sprint 2, competition 2 was sprint 3, championship was sprint 4, but then we kind of had micro sprints, and there we were like, okay, we're gonna tear the robot down and build it back up between competition 2 and the championship, and then okay, we built it back up. What's still wrong with it? Okay, let's do another long Saturday, and then kind of. So does that sort of is that what you were?
Yeah, honestly, that's probably one of the cleanest communications that I've heard in a while. Being able to have those scrimmages. I know for like our team, we go to scrimmages.
We have different schedules, so yeah.
Right, like we have a 6-week product build season, and then we have competition, and then we have a week or 2 between to the next competition. And usually at that point, we're either in or we're out of the championship, right? So at that point, we don't really have as much of a like battle testing. That said, if you have the ability to do a scrimmage like that and being able to actually battle test your robot, if you can do that, I mean, that's a great way of having your sprint review, right?
I think, and I know with your presentation, I think most teams, at least at the FRC level, and that's the only thing I know, you're almost doing sort of an agile build environment without even knowing it. And if you're a lot of folks like I am, or in this area, if you're running on government and defense contracts, you're used to this multi-year requirements definition, multi-year development, multi-year test. Oh no, I got it wrong. And there you go. So the agile philosophy is that you engage with, and I'm gonna get the names wrong, right? But with your stakeholders and your users, and you don't have this large dogmatic shell by shell requirements document that's probably not necessarily going to meet what the user requirements really are in an operational environment. And you build a little, test a little, deploy a little, build a little. And that's, you probably already do that. So I think what Jacob can provide is some more of the framework tools that are actually out there, so you're not winging it on your own. I know we use Kanban in 1731, and it helps a lot with us to figure out what our sprints are going to be and where we are against that.
Yeah, one of the things that I'm missing out on here, by the way, I think is a free resource to every first team. They have a software to use for tracking this. I think it's Monday.com or something like that. But that's something that's available for free for all the teams as well. That helps. That's kind of the software structure to Scrum and Kanban. So that's a great tool.
You build in specific dates, like, design freeze types of things.
That's a
I
amateur.
mean, we got into some iteratives, on the shooter, that almost were never gonna end.
Well-
Oh, I saw this on, but this keeps doing this, and, and all these iterations.
Yeah.
Sooner or later, you gotta design freeze and you gotta go forward, and so I'm just wondering if you have a concept or a timeline or way that you make that determination.
I mean, that's a long answer, right? I mean, I think the one thing that I can draw from, back when I was doing systems engineering, there's like a set of principles for system engineering. One of them that I like the most was the principle of sufficiency, right? It's what do you need to get the bare minimum of what your goals are, right? It's not, what do I need to be over optimized? What do I need to, be the best of the best? What do I need to get to that first point so that I can move on to my next priority? And once you address those priorities, then you can go back and we can reiterate that. And if you take that approach, you're gonna learn more in the long run, be able to have better design later on, right? It also feeds into, right, a sub-optimized system is going to be less optimal than an optimized system. Right? I mean, if you go and you optimize your shooter and your drivetrain, at the end of the day, most likely your what's the right word? Complexity of your system increases. So that you end up having a system that isn't maintainable as easily, and it's a risky system first. It's something where you take a step back. You have a completely working system and iterate.
Yeah, I mean, so like how we kind of lay out our schedule is Sunday is a sprint to get a requirements document. Like it's a brutal 6 hours, lots of emotion, and we don't agree with this, we don't agree with that, but that lays out our requirements of, and it's our entire design space. It's here's the threshold and here's the objective. And if, if it's, I don't know, say move 12 feet per second is the threshold and objective is 16 feet per second, cool, that's your design space you're gonna live in. So you have that, and then like your prototypes and stuff is like, you want anything and everything. I don't care how good or bad the idea is. I wanna see it work or not work, because I'm a subscriber to failing is learning.
Yeah.
So the sooner you can fail, the sooner you can figure out something that is gonna work. And if the first thing works, it still might not be the best thing.
That's it, there's degrees of work.
Right,
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
but it's at some point in time, and then, depending on where the system, right, depending on the system you're working on, like the climb, you almost, in a lot of instances, in a lot of FRC games anyways, you have really one chance at integrating the climb into the robot. You have one shot at it to fit the rest of your robot architecture. So that one's probably gonna keep sliding, but your shooter or whatever else, you wanna get on the robot, get it out there so you get driver testing and autonomous testing and all that. And it's, Jacob was, kind of alluding to it a little bit of, you have to understand what is good enough and compromise for good enough versus technically the best. Because if you wait to settle for technically the best, the rest of the robot may not get them.
That's the magic of trying to get the kids to accept that, right?
Yeah.
It's like, well, that other people are gonna be.
It's hard to get the mentors to accept it, let alone the kids.
There are customers. So it's-
But sometimes you have to let them do that to learn it the hard way.
Yeah.
absolutely.
That's kind of the point, is like, we know this already.
It's like once every 4 years, right?
That's
Yeah,
also
right.
where having, right, a prioritization scheme, whether it's Moscow or Canal or whatever, a rank order, right? And then having a definition of done is also important, right? I mean, whether it's your metric and it's on a story by story basis, like we need to achieve this KPI, right? But having that definition of done so that you have your minimum threshold, right? That way you agree early on that this is where we stop pushing for now.
Yeah.
a really basic question, because I think these are far more nuanced. If you have a team that is really trying to figure out how to like implement a project management plan in it, are there any sort of recommendations that you have or resources that you would recommend for sort of off the shelf shells, not the software piece, but sort of like built out some standard design pieces that are already sort of laid out for folks that you would recommend?
Within the context of First Robotics? Or
Yeah.
within the context of, that's a good question. I should reach out to Shelley and see. I know, right, there's institutional knowledge, right, like some of the older teams. And I know that, I think Shelley has a list of the folks. There are teams that are happy to like reach out to other teams. So I would probably start there. That's it.
Yeah.
First Inspires might have a network of folks.
Yeah, I would reach out to Shelley and have Shelley get you in contact with some other teams. And it's.
FRC.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to also decide, just because team A does it, doesn't mean it's the right thing for you. Like, so it's kind of like talk to 1, 2, 3 teams. And then pick in place how they do it and merge and make it your own.
And I'm thinking about this more as a tool to get people beyond the, wow, we really need to sit down and like have a project management plan and say, look, there's some stuff. And there's some basic tasks that everyone has to do regardless of your philosophy or whatever, right? And to really kind of move the conversation around like being able to have the more finite conversations about this is a sprint effort, this is that, as opposed to like, what do we do this week? It's sort of like, it's almost like using this as a discipline tool. So I like your idea of, it's a mind trick a little bit, but it's kind of like giving people a shell of a thing and then being able to sort of say, you know, these sort of things are baked in. How do you want to innovate in between that and giving sort of the boundaries of that instead of the whole, how do we do this every year kind of thing?
That's a thought, right? I mean, like, it's gonna be hard to implement this on day 0, right? This is something
Yep.
that requires off-season work. Yeah. But I
And
mean,
someone else with the knowledge of like some of these things, right? Like you would not do it off the shelf if you didn't know some of it. So it'd be hard to get a lot of buy-in from people who are very new to it, yeah.
That said, if you can find a project management plan and have a workshop around like, hey, let's dissect, you know, the FAA's project plan for ERAN or something like that, right? And taking a look at what is in each section, and that's all that, right? My dad, right? But there's a lot to learn from those documents. There's a lot of thought that goes into how do we plan around planning for a project, right? What goes into scope and cost, there's not resource, right? So there's a lot to learn from those documents, and that could be a good workshop if you want to get into the nitty gritty of it, right?
And just a question for you about putting this in the context of a 6-week build session for Agile, right? So would it be best to have, let's say, 1 sprint a week and like sprint 1 is the drivetrain, 2 is the shooter, 3 is the climber, or is it like week 1 is you know, build all the manipulators, and then each subsequent sprint is iterating on those manipulators?
I mean, that really comes down to tailoring for your team. There's a lot that wasn't in here. There's a concept of scrum of scrums, right? So breaking it down into multiple teams. So you might have a software scrum team, you might have a hardware sub team, or you know, break it down even further than that. And they'll get together on a regular cadence to make sure that there's communication across those teams. You can have multiple work streams happening at the same time, right? You'll see that on projects, right? You'll have a, you know, in development, new functionality and right.
I think we go, but you mentioned that as part of your Scrum planning or your Agile planning, you have priorities.
Yeah.
And so I think, I was hoping you were gonna say, yes, no, maybe. Depends on where you are. So if you have a COTS off the shelf swerve drive and you already have Phoenix X, so all you have to do is rebuild that for the new year. So that might be the first thing you do, it might be pretty easy to do, and then it gives you, because you're private, you get the software people and the drivers, some sort of a chassis or a vehicle for them to do their sprint type activities. But someone else might be saying, well, we don't even have that, so we're gonna focus on something else while we're doing that in a longer term. And that might be broken down into mini scrums to get your swerve drive fabricated.
I mean, like anything, it depends on your team. It depends a lot on your resources too.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
Like for us, we were fortunate this year, we actually had a few additional mechanical mentors, so we were able to like, all right. You have this system, that system, this system, that system with a team of students. And we were able to break it out, and we did a giant scrum, and I'm gonna call it, we don't use these words, but that's essentially what it was, right? Like, it was like a week of prototyping, and by prototyping, it was proof of concept, so it was like all about the 5, 10, 15, 20 minute, slap something on a drill or whatever it is and see if it works, yes, no, take a picture of it, move on to the next idea. And then we were able by like that Saturday, have a very kind of like I call it Gorilla CAD, but the stick figure CAD model. We had a Gorilla CAD model of the architecture of the robot on like Saturday after. So like 1 week after kickoff, we kind of knew the space claims of the robot. Not sure there's lots of details that go in it and how does this fit there and shifting and that, but. And then from there, it was, all right, that group is working on iterating the intake, and this group's iterating the shooter, and all right, make sure the interfaces still work and play well with each other, and this doesn't have to shift to that, and have that communication across teams. As long as you have like I think your key points defined, the rest is a giant open slate. Yeah, for the teams.
I think we did wrap it up.
Yeah, I have one more thought, but that makes me remember, project initialization, so people call it sprint zero. Scrum purists don't like that term. But project initialization is really important, and it sets the tone, but having a framework, and maybe it's a framework, like we've used stuff like postcards from the future, like if somebody was to write, you know, a letter about your news briefing, write about your robot in 2 months or 3 months or something like that, what would it say? What are the values that you want? And looking at the work that you're trying to achieve in these goals, and then looking at it through some sort of prioritization technique, like value versus effort, right? It's good to have high value, low effort work done first, and then high effort work, right? And kind of work your way through that. But those are some items that can help answer those questions too. But you don't have to go by like one component. Have multiple work streams.
Okay, well,
I think that's all we got time.
nice
for.
job.
Thank you.